Here we are at Baublitz Airport, runway 28. So previous video was at runway 10. So I'm practicing my landings here at the other end of this runway. So this is the runway pointing into the west. It's a day with a right crosswind, blowing pretty briskly from the right. Typical grass field takeoff, where I lift wheels off a little early, flatten the climb, gain some speed, and then begin the climb out. We'll climb at between 600 and 900 feet per minute here at the beginning, and when we reach somewhere around 250 to 350 feet above the runway, we'll turn on our crosswind leg. Pattern altitude at this airport is between 1500 and 1700, depending on who you speak to. The official one is 1500 feet. The FAA typical recommendation is to fly at 1,000 feet above the runway for your pattern altitude, so that's the difference between the 1500 and 1700. Still working on my control of that right rudder during a left turn climb out. Plane has a little bit of left turning tendencies, and you have to give it a little more right rudder than I'm used to on the climb out. That's why you'll see a little skidding on my right turn climb outs. Alright, so we're going to level off. Typical here, we're about abeam the numbers here, and I'll start pulling flaps and slowing the plane down, start our decline or descent. The big farm ahead is the landmark, pretty much we use for turning onto the base leg. Where the power poles meet the farm is where I use it as my indication. In a faster plane like 172, we'd be out past the farm. This next landmark is this house coming up here near the corner or the bend in the road, and I should begin my base to final turn earlier than I do here, so I'm end up going a little past the center line of the runway, and I'll have to correct that by flying left. You notice that I don't overbank or overuse the rudder. I just kind of fly to the left and then correct and fly back to the right. The text here tells you that the approach here is going to look steeper than normal because the field inclination at the beginning is uphill, and you need to flare a little bit more when that occurs. And you'll also notice that the approach area is sloping greatly uphill, so with a headwind, which is what we've got, a right headwind crosswind, you're going to see a little bit higher sink rate in the approach, and we're going to have to use a little bit more power and speed to control that. Alright, so far we're lined up with the center line. Approach looks decent at this point. We're declining or descending at our 600 feet per minute. We're going to slow that down here as we approach the runway. A little crosswind gust. Now we're at slow motion. You're going to see that again I want to reduce the descent rate. I use the stick and not power. Again, I should have used power instead of the stick. So I have a little bit of a bounce, but was able to keep good control of it with the rudder. So I stayed in it even though I bounced twice in this case. We hit the runway during the first 200 feet, which was my goal, but that is a uphill area. It flattens out in the second 200 feet, and then after that it's pretty much a downhill till we reach the bottom here. So my rollout is going to continue at around 30 miles per hour till we hit the bottom of the runway, and we've used up about 1,000 feet of runway here at this point. The little service road on the right green is a little over 1,000 feet, or is about 1,000 feet. So now we're going to turn around and go back and do it again. This is actually my second landing of the day. The first one was okay, not a whole lot different. But it didn't teach me some things that I wanted to remind myself of and teach others here. So I thought the second and third landings were more useful for learning. One thing I notice on a grass strip typically is you probably got to taxi a little slower because they sure are bumpy. I can see why people like the Alaska bush wheels on these grass fields, because even with the 856 tires, it bounces quite a bit if you try to taxi it any more higher than a walking speed. You'll see I'm bouncing around pretty good at 8 to 10 miles an hour. So the best thing to do is just take your time and taxi at 5 to 6 miles per hour. Okay, this just gives you an idea of, you can see the windsock to your left there. We're going to pull over here in the tie-out area. We'll make our turn and begin our departure about 100 feet from the end of the runway. We're on center line. We're going to apply power gradually. Around 30 miles an hour, stop pulling the back stick. We're on the ground, off the ground. Flatten out, gain some speed, and then start climbing. Take a little sojourn to the southwest. Give the plane a rest from all its climbing and declining or descending. Probably best for these engines to let the temperature stabilize a little bit more, so we'll let the battery charge up and run it continuously for a few minutes. Take a sightseeing tour along Meddy Creek and over to the Stewartstown area. Kind of following the route that I've used when I drive here from my home. This will give us some practice on identifying the runway or the airport approach area coming in from the southwest. As I mentioned in a previous video, grass fields can be hard to find sometimes, particularly when the grass is the same color as all the territory around it. So you need to get familiar with the pattern of landmarks so that you can find your way. Again, the landmark here is at Gwinston Presbyterian Church, right on my nose to the right. And the airport, as you can see, the distinctive buildings and the one building all the way to the left on the end tells us that we're heading straight for the airport. You can see Muddy Creek Forks Road below us and the farm to our right. A new landmark that I noticed here is a red roof structure pretty much on the pattern that we're going to probably fly right over as we enter downwind for runway 28. This 80 miles an hour is pretty much my speed as I'm descending into the pattern altitude. I'll start slowing it up when I want to be in the pattern, and then I need to get down below 80 in order to pull the first notch of flaps. Alright, we're in downwind leg right now. Going to pull the power back and pull the carb heat on. Use a little trim to reduce the pressure needed on the stick. Without the trim, you'd need to push the stick pretty hard forward. It would want to go nose up pretty severely if you don't adjust the trim. So we'll do a gradual turn here onto the base leg. I again turned too late on the final turn. I'll have to do a little bit of a recovery, fly to the left and then to the right to reach the center line. I'm also going to try a little bit slower approach this time and a little flatter descent rate. So I'm at you're going to see I lose altitude on purpose here a little bit at the beginning, and then carb heat off so that I'm ready for power and a go around if I need to. Alright, now I'm just about on the center line, correcting for a right crosswind, and I can see that I'm going to come in with a very shallow final approach. I'm going to give it a little bit more power. I'm up over 1500 RPM, 1700 RPM. You can look on the inclinometer. I'm still pretty flat. My plane is neutral and not tail down or tail up. Sink rate was a little bit high, so essentially I gave it more power. I'm using the throttle here to control the sink rate pretty much. You see I give it a lot of throttle right here. The sink rate went down almost 600 feet per minute. Alright, now I've got it the sink rate where I want it. As I go over the numbers, coming down. And sink rate's a little bit more than what I should have had on an upslope part of the runway. I probably should have gotten a little bit burst of power, just a bit. So I hit the ground a little bit harder than I would like, a bounce. Good control of the direction. I was almost at stall speed when I touched, so not a lot of energy to manage here. And you can see my tail was low when I came down, so I was almost a three-pointer when I touched. Not quite. And my tail's all the way down now, as you can see, and we're not going to use up as much runway this time. We're going to be almost, probably I could be done at the 700-foot marker if I'd wanted to use brakes. Without brakes, I'm pretty much done here at 800 feet. So this plane can be easily landed in a 1,000-foot runway, no problem. It takes off, obviously, even easier. Take off over a 50-foot obstacle is probably more like 11 or 1,200 feet, unless you really want to hot dog it. That's with one person on board and half a tank of fuel. Alright, so we're done for the day. What I learned is that the approach for this runway 28 at Baublitz is a little tricky because of the downslope, the heavy downslope at the beginning, and the upslope area on the touchdown area. So that's the end of the video, and I learned a lot as usual, and these videos are very helpful for me.